George Samueli, it is now 9:08. A very dark, grim, gloomy, miserable, rainy Budapest, with spring allegedly around the corner, but looks more like something that's somewhere in the rearview mirror. Um, yeah, everything is as dark as ever. It is the longish days. I haven't seen any longish days so far. On that bleak note, let's think about something more cheerful. Thank you, everybody who has joined me for the Tuesday live stream, and really appreciate everybody who's here. It's now, of course, a little later in the United States because the Americans very smartly wanted to get their longer days in nice and early, and unlike the numbers already complaining about the audio. Is this better? Audio not good. Audio, it's unbearable. But let me. Okay, is this any better? Is the audio any better now? Audio? Any feedback on the audio? Is this any better? How's this? Can anyone hear me? No, it's not better. Is this is no better, or is this better? You just tell me. You can't hear it. No better. You can't hear anything. No, it is good. It's good. So some people are saying it's good. Essie Delendam, he's put thumbs up. So Marx is saying it's good. It's good here. All right. We got solved that problem. I did the technical genius thing. I refreshed the page. So I refreshed the page. So anyway, let's hope that I can hear you, dear George. Thank you. This is Barry. Thank you so much. So it's been a very eventful 24 hours. So it started off with the arrest and abduction of the former Philippines president, Rodrigo Duterte, who is now in The Hague, which is kind of big news. And and therefore, I want to get onto that. Then we've had the ruling by Romania's constitutional court upholding the Central Election Commission's ban on Ceausescu's running for president in May. So the man who was destined to win in Shopranka. Oh, that's good. That's a good name. Shopranka said audio is better now, George. Thank you so much, Shopranka. So it was no surprise. I mean, the Romania's constitutional court is basically funded by USAID, so it was no surprise that they had these people who were going to rule in favor of the Central Election Commission and preventing Ceausescu from running. That now seems to be a fairly definitive ruling. There's no other way out of it because because he had already appealed to the European Court of Human Rights, and the European Court of Human Rights said, "Hey, we're not getting involved in this." So he's pretty much done. There's no really other jurisdiction. This is the highest court in Romania, so nothing he can do. Brussels is very, very happy, rubbing its hands with glee, though, of course,
outwardly will say, well, we're not getting involved. Hey, not our fight, not our thing. So they're not getting involved. Even though, of course, they are the key players in all of this. So what happens, in Romania now? I don't know. Maybe Georgescu could use somebody else as a stalking horse. Let the stalking horse run, and that would just be a mechanism for getting Georgescu into power via a stalking horse. I mean, that's a possibility. But then, of course, the big news was the negotiations that took all day today in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and it ended with a rather dramatic joint statement issued by the U.S. and the Romanian delegation. There's a joint statement, so it's published on the State Department website, but it's also issued by Yermak, the Zelensky's chief of staff, and then Rubio and Mike Waltz did a news conference. So let's first of all take a look at the news. The news conference now of Rubio and Waltz, and then talk about it. It's about 10 minutes, but it's worth taking a look and seeing how it's going, because from the upshot of this meeting today is that the United States proposed a total ceasefire. Remember, Romania came in and echoing Macron's plan, which is that there'll be a 1 month long partial ceasefire. So a ceasefire on the air and in the sea, but no ceasefire on land. That was the Romanian proposal. And then the Americans came in and suggested a total ceasefire for 30 days. Everything, total ceasefire. And Romania says it accepts it. It accepts a total ceasefire. And then the Americans say, well, now it's up to the Russians, and we're going to be talking to the Russians. Trump said this later on, saying, we are already talking with the Russians. We're going to be talking more with the Russians tomorrow to get them to agree to the 30-day ceasefire. In the meantime, the restrictions on military aid to Ukraine have been lifted. The restrictions on intelligence provision to Ukraine have been lifted, which may seem, on the face of it, to be a little illogical. I mean, if we're talking about a ceasefire, why are you lifting restrictions on military aid? Why are you lifting restrictions on intelligence? I mean, the intelligence you're providing is intelligence on targeting. So you're helping Ukraine conduct its targeting while you're talking about a ceasefire. So, and then during this 30-day ceasefire, there will be negotiations for a permanent ceasefire. So let's first of all look at the news conference by Waltz and Rubio, and see what we think about that. So here. So here's the Rubio and Waltz speaking after the talks in Jeddah.
This is ending this war once and for all. Today we made an offer that the Ukrainians have accepted, which is to enter into a ceasefire and into immediate negotiations to end this conflict in a way that's enduring and sustainable and accounts for their interests, their security, their ability to prosper as a nation. I want to personally we both want to thank the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, His Majesty, for hosting us, for making this possible. They've been instrumental in this process, and we're very grateful to them for hosting us here today. And hopefully we'll take this offer now to the Russians, and we hope that they'll say yes, to peace. The ball is now in their court. And but again, the president's objective here is number one, above everything else. He wants the war to end, and I think today Ukraine has taken a concrete step in that regard. We hope the Russians will reciprocate.
Well, just to add to the the Secretary's comments, the Ukrainian delegation today made something very clear, that they share President Trump's vision for peace. They share his determination to end the fighting, to end the killing, to end the tragic meat grinder of people and national treasure that's happening on the front in Ukraine. Number one. Number two, they made concrete steps and concrete proposals, not only accepting our proposal for a full ceasefire, which you can see the details of which are in our joint statement that we released together. But we also got into substantive details on how this war is going to permanently end, what type of guarantees they're going to have for their long-term security and prosperity, but also really looking at what it's going to take to finally end this the horrific fighting. The other piece that I just want to make very clear is President Trump started this diplomatic effort in the Oval Office, talking to both leaders, both President Putin and President Zelensky back to back. And now that shuttle diplomacy continues. We have a named delegation in terms of next steps from the Russian side. We have a named delegation in terms of next steps from the Ukrainian side. I will talk to my Russian counterpart in the coming days. Secretary Rubio will be with G7 foreign ministers in the next couple of days. We have the NATO Secretary General in the White House on Thursday, and we'll take the process forward from there. So, as a result of that, and I think as a result of this positive step forward, the president has decided to lift the pause on aid and on our security assistance to Ukraine going forward, and that's effective immediately.
All right, your colleagues have chosen 3 questioners. Let's start with Alex Marquardt of CNN.
Thank you. Several questions on the ceasefire. We understood it coming into this was a Ukrainian proposal for a partial ceasefire. How did this become an American proposal for an immediate 30-day ceasefire? And to be clear, you're talking about a complete ceasefire across the front line, not just the aerial and maritime ceasefire that the Ukrainians proposed. And then finally, how do you expect to take this to the Russians? Is it Mr. Witkoff, who we understand is heading to Moscow later this week? Will he deliver that to Putin? Will it be President Trump to President Putin? Will it be you and your counterparts? How will that actually happen and when?
Well, on the first point, your question is yes. That's the offer. The offer is to stop the shooting. The goal here is the only way out to end this war is to negotiate out of it. There's no military solution to this war. The solution to this war and the way to end it and to achieve the president's objective of peace is to negotiate. But before you can negotiate, you have to stop shooting at each other. And that's what the president has wanted to see. And that's the commitment we got today from the Ukrainian side, their willingness to do that. Obviously, now that'll be delivered to the Russians. It'll be delivered to them directly through multiple channels, meaning not only will they obviously see it, but it'll be communicated to them through our diplomatic channels, through conversations and other methods. But they'll obviously be well aware. And our hope is that the Russians will say yes, that they will also agree. So the shooting will stop, the killing will stop, the dying will stop, and the talks can begin about how to end this war permanently in a way that's acceptable and enduring for both sides.
Look, there's been all kinds of discussions in terms of different types of ceasefires. There was the deal in terms of grain moving years ago. There's been discussion of halting aerial attacks on each other's infrastructure. The president has made it clear and certainly made it clear to us that all fighting needs to stop. And the Ukrainians have agreed to that proposal. They're ready for peace. And now we'll take that to the Russians and get their response.
All right, next, Jennifer Jacobs, CBS. Great. Hi. Are you expecting any goodwill gestures from Russia? Do you have a deadline in mind for when you're hoping for them to reciprocate on that?
Well, we're going to take the offer to them. We're going to tell them this is what's on the table. Ukraine is ready to stop shooting and start talking. And now it'll be up to them to say yes or no. I hope they're going to say yes. And if they do, then I think we made great progress. If they say no, then we'll unfortunately know what the impediment is to peace here. But the president's been abundantly clear he wants the shooting to stop. He wants the warfare to stop. He wants the dying and the suffering to stop. And he believes, and rightfully so, that the only way to end this war is to negotiate an end to it. And we think that it's always easier to negotiate an end to the war when people aren't shooting at each other. That's how the president believes. That's what we hope to achieve. The Ukrainians today have expressed their willingness and readiness to do so immediately. We hope the Russians' answer to that will also be yes.
But no deadline set, sir.
Well, the deadline is we hope to do this as soon as possible. Every day that goes by that this war continues, people die, people are bombed, people are hurt on both sides of this conflict. The president wanted this war to end yesterday and the day before. The president's been clear he wants peace. And so we wanted to see it as soon as possible. So our hope is that the Russians will answer yes as quickly as possible so we can get to the second phase of this, which is real negotiations, not never-ending dialogue, talk forever, but real negotiations to end this conflict in a way that's acceptable to both sides, sustainable, and that ensures the stability and security of Ukraine for the long term.
All right, so that's the news conference delivered by Rubio and Waltz, and you get the impression. They said, we came up with this plan. This is, so in other words, this is a Trump plan, which is a total ceasefire, not a partial ceasefire. This is a total ceasefire for 30 days. Ukraine has agreed to it, and now it's up to the Russians. And Rubio says there that, well, we're going to see what the Russians think. I mean, we'll see whether they will agree to this. Now, this is, as I've said before here in the Gaggle, this puts Russia into a very difficult position. Because, and I know, and I've noticed even from the comments here, saying, well, of course, Russia won't agree to it. Well, I don't know whether they'll agree to it, but if Russia doesn't agree to it, then they're going to face the fury of Trump, because this is Trump has now put. If this were just simply a Ukraine plan, and Ukraine had put this forward, and then Rubio said, well, okay, well, we're going to put this before the Russians and see what the Russians think. But this isn't a Ukraine plan. This is an American plan. This is a Trump plan. So therefore, when they go to the Russians, then what they're doing is presenting the Russians with a Trump plan. This is President Trump's plan. He wants an immediate ceasefire and the start of serious negotiations towards a final settlement. Now, if Russia then says no, then they will face the full fury of Trump. Trump is going to go all in with support for Ukraine. And that could be quite problematic. I don't think we should just simply dismiss it and say, well, Russia has withstood pressure before, and whatever. It could be quite problematic. He's going to give all military assistance and intelligence assistance to Ukraine, and I think they're going to tighten sanctions. And the thing about the sanctions, and this was stated by Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent last week, when he gave a speech to the Economic Club of New York. He said, well, the reason why, this is Bessent, this is the Trump administration that supposedly is so pro-Russian. So Bessent said, well, the reason why Russia has been able to conduct this war is that the sanctions have not been fully implemented. The Biden administration never had the guts to fully implement the sanctions. So therefore, you can expect that if they do decide to intensify the sanctions, then I think they will hurt. Will they make a huge impact on the war? I don't know, but I think they will try. You see, the problem is that Russia has now, taken, embrace Trump wholeheartedly. There's Peskov saying, "Well, we and Trump see the world alike. We're on the same page." And you see all these editorials and op-eds written by all these Russian thinkers. Yeah, Russia America partnership. We're gonna we're basically in national sovereignty. We're gonna have a geopolitical embrace, and this is going to be back to the good old days of great power politics, and so. Well, you can't then turn around and say, well, Mr. Trump, you know where you can shove your peace plan. I mean, having said all that about Trump and how you and Trump are going to have this partnership, and now America and Russia are friends, which is what the Russians have been saying now in the past few weeks. Oh, we're friends with with the Europeans. We can't deal with the Europeans, but with the Americans we can deal with, because Trump and the Kremlin see the world in very similar ways. Well, now you've got the Trump plan. And Trump will probably say to the Russians that if you go along with this, that you agree to a ceasefire, there'll be all sorts of nice goodies for you down the road. We're going to lift sanctions. And, there will be all kinds of business deals that we can work together. Maybe we can work together in the Middle East. We can work together on the Arctic, getting all the mineral deposits of the Arctic out, and maybe we can invest in your rare earth metals and rare metals and so on. Now, I mean, people say, oh, of course Russians will say no. Well, Russians will just say no. Yeah. Well, maybe they will. I don't know. I have my doubts. I have my serious doubts that the Russians will say no. If I was speculating, if I was gambling, I would say that the Russians will probably say yes to the ceasefire, but the question will arise in the negotiations, because the whole point of this 30-day ceasefire is that the time will be used to negotiate a permanent settlement. Now, if the ceasefire is violated, I mean, if and that's quite possible, that the ceasefire will be used by Ukraine and its American and European sponsors to move to a unilateral advantage for Ukraine against the Russians, then the ceasefire obviously will come to an end. And similarly, I mean, in terms of the negotiations for the final settlement, that's where Russia can come up and say what are the terms on which they will agree to end the war. Now, so a 30-day ceasefire doesn't actually commit Russia to anything. I mean, that's just a 30-day ceasefire. What it does do is it keeps Russia in good standing with Trump, while saying no to Trump will be very problematic for Russia, because this again, it's the Russians who have been talking, loudly for the past few weeks about how much they love Trump. We really see everything in the same way. Not like those scummy Europeans. We don't have any time for the Europeans, but for the that. Now, so then during those 30 days, there could then be negotiation. There's no reason why you can't end the ceasefire. I mean, Israel has done this. I mean, Israel has every intention of ending this ceasefire with Hamas. It's clear that Israel is not moving towards the second phase. I mean, that's it. They made this clear. They're not going to move to a second phase. So therefore, this whole ceasefire with Hamas is likely to come to an end very shortly. And the previous ceasefire with Hamas also ended. So a 30-day ceasefire doesn't necessarily lock you in to anything. So that's where it becomes difficult as to what they will move on to during that negotiations. Now, well, all right. Let's first of all take a look at the statement, the joint statement that was issued by the Ukrainians and by the Americans. So, well, let me first do this. Okay, that's it. Okay, now. No, God, this is a pain. Yeah, let me pull this up. So this is the statement that was issued by Andrei Yermak, who led the he's the Zelensky's chief of staff, and then he led the Ukrainian team in Jeddah. So the statement that he issued is exactly word for word exactly the same one that the Americans issued. So it says, today in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, under the gracious hospitality of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the United States and Ukraine took important steps toward restoring a lasting peace in Ukraine. Representatives from both countries praised the courage of the Ukrainian people in defending their country and agreed that now is the time to begin the process of establishing a lasting peace. The Ukrainian delegation once again expressed deep gratitude on behalf of the Ukrainian people to President Trump. You know, they got to get that in. Gratitude to President Trump, the U.S. Congress, and the people of the United States for enabling significant progress on the path to peace. And then Ukraine expressed its readiness to accept the U.S. proposal for an immediate temporary 30-day ceasefire. This is very important. It's the U.S. proposal. It's not the Ukraine proposal. It's not Macron proposal. It's the U.S. proposal. And that's going to be a crucial part of the talks that are going to take place in Moscow, which could be extended by mutual consent of the parties, subject to acceptance and simultaneous implementation by the Russian Federation. The United States will convey to Russia that reciprocity from Russia is key to achieving peace. And the United States is immediately lifting the pause in intelligence sharing and resuming security assistance to Ukraine. So this is very, very crucial. I mean, Rubio said this in the news conference, and as I'll show you, the media, the Western media, are just running with that. That's the only thing that they're interested in. They're lifting the pause in intelligence sharing and resuming security assistance, because of course the Western media want this war to go on. So this Trump, I think, really does want to end it. We don't, whether he can succeed, that's a different issue. But I think he does want to end it. But this commitment by the United States of resuming security assistance and lifting the pause in intelligence sharing, that's just going to help Ukraine. But that's why the Western media, that's all they're running with. That's what they're so excited by, because they want to go on. They want this war to go on. And Trump, incidentally, is doing that. And the reason was that Trump and his people had made clear that if Ukraine shows itself to be serious about peace talks, the intelligence sharing will resume, and the arms deliveries will resume. That's all Ukraine had to do. Ukraine had to show that it was serious about peace talks, and then the arms deliveries restart. The delegations also discussed the importance of humanitarian efforts as part of the peace process, including during the aforementioned ceasefire, including the exchange of prisoners of war, the release of detained civilians, and the return of forcibly displaced Ukrainian children. So that's an interesting sop that they've thrown to the Ukrainians, the issue of forcibly displaced Ukrainian children, because of course the Russians do not accept that they forcibly displaced Ukrainian children. They said that these were orphans, and they were seeking they were trying to provide protection for the children from the fighting. And then the two delegations agreed to identify the composition of their negotiating teams and to immediately begin negotiations to achieve a sustainable peace that would ensure the long-term security of Ukraine. Well, that, of course, is an interesting formulation, because the Americans have essentially signed on to something that the Ukrainians and the Europeans insist on, which is, oh, well, the only thing that matters is the security of Ukraine. But of course, as we know, this war started precisely because Russia had been complaining for years and years and years that no one was taking into consideration the security of Russia. And so now the Americans have embraced the position of Ukraine, saying that the only thing that matters is the security of Ukraine. Well, that's not going to get us anywhere. That's not going to be the basis for any long-term solution to the problem, because fine, you want to take care of the security of Ukraine, let's say, okay, that's fine, but you have to then address the security of Russia. And as long as you're issuing statements in which the only thing that you bring up is the security of Ukraine, but you don't address the issue of security of Russia, which was precisely what started the whole thing, then you're not going to get very far. And therefore, this was very ill-advised for supposed diplomatic professionals to insert that, the long-term security of Ukraine. And so, if we go on here, that this is, yes. So here we are. Begin to achieve the sustainable peace that will ensure the long-term security of Ukraine. Whereas you could have said to begin negotiations to achieve a sustainable peace that will ensure the long-term security of all states. And that would be acceptable. But if all we're talking about is the security of Ukraine, then we're not really going to get very far. Because then we're back to where we were, and therefore you're building up military alliances, military bases, in order to surround Russia with armed, aggressive, hostile states. The United States committed to discussing these specific proposals with representatives of Russia. The Ukrainian delegation reiterated that European partners must be involved in the peace process. So the Ukrainian delegation reiterated, but notice that the United States committed to discussing these specific proposals with representatives of Russia. The Ukrainian delegation reiterated that European partners must be involved in the peace process. So that's not, the Americans did not reiterate this. The Americans did not commit themselves to the European partners being involved in the peace process. So again, you got to, when you pass the words, what did the two delegations agree on? The two delegations agreed on beginning negotiations to achieve a sustainable peace that will ensure the long-term security of Ukraine. So that's not great for Russia, as I said, because if the United States is supposed to consider more than just the security of Ukraine. So that's the two delegations. Then we have the United States committing itself to discussing these specific proposals with representatives of Russia. And Trump has already said, we're talking to them now, we're going to talk more tomorrow. And then we have the Ukrainian delegation by themselves insisting that European partners must be involved in the peace process. And then we go on. Finally, the presidents of both countries agreed to conclude as soon as possible a comprehensive agreement on the development of Ukraine's critical mineral resources to strengthen Ukraine's economy and ensure Ukraine's long-term prosperity and security. That surprises me a little bit. I had expected that they would sign this deal today in Jeddah, so they still haven't signed it. And then, of course, when you look at that, look at the way the media are playing this. This is Politico. U.S. to reinstate aid to Ukraine after Saudi ceasefire talks. That's all that matters. U.S. to reinstate aid. Politico. Wall Street Journal. U.S. to restore military support as Ukraine agrees to ceasefire. So again, the media are not even hiding their glee that military aid is going to start flowing to Ukraine again so they can go on fighting this war. They can go on carrying out this war against Russia. U.S. to restore military support as Ukraine agrees to ceasefire. New York Times, U.S. agrees to resume military assistance to Ukraine. Again, that's all they care about. Washington Post, U.S. lifts pause on Ukraine aid as Kiev agrees to ceasefire proposal. And then this is the Washington Post story, blah blah blah, and then and here we are. Financial Times, Ukraine says it is willing to accept. So Financial Times didn't at least bring up the whole issue of military assistance, but at least Financial Times emphasized that the ceasefire could be extended if both parties agreed. So basically, that's just 30 days. There's no necessity to extend it after 30 days. And so on. And then Zelensky himself issued this this lengthy tweet. I received a report from our delegation on their meeting with the American team in Saudi Arabia. The discussion lasted most of the day and was good and constructive. Our teams were able to discuss many important details. Our position remains absolutely clear. Ukraine has been seeking peace from the very first second of this war, and we want to do everything to achieve it as soon as possible and in a reliable way. This is, of course, completely untrue, so that the war does not return. At this meeting with the Americans, Ukraine proposed 3 key points: silence in the skies, stopping missile strikes, bombs, and long-range drone attacks, silence at sea, real confidence-building measures in this whole situation in which diplomacy is ongoing, which primarily means the release of prisoners of war and detainees, and the return of Ukrainian children. That was the who were forcibly transferred to Russia. So that was the Ukrainian proposal. And then it says, the American side understands our argument and considers our proposals. I'm grateful to President Trump for the constructive conversation between our teams. During today's talks, the U.S. side proposed taking an even bigger first step, a 30-day full interim ceasefire, not only stopping missile, drone, and bomb attacks, not only in the Black Sea, but also along the entire front line. Ukraine is ready to accept this proposal. We see it as a positive step and are ready to take it. Now it is up to the United States to convince Russia to do the same. If Russia agrees, the ceasefire will take effect immediately. All right, so that's the statements today. Now, as I said, and I'm not sure people will agree with me. And well, obviously, we'll see what happens. I think it will be very difficult for Russia to say no to the ceasefire. Just that, to the ceasefire. This isn't the long-term peace agreement, but a ceasefire will be very difficult to say no to, because here, having embraced Trump and made clear to Trump repeatedly, and Trump has said this over and over again. Trump says, "Well, the Russians have made clear to me that they're very serious about peace." I mean, I don't know how many times Trump has said this. They've made clear to me they're very serious about peace. So if you now turn around to Trump and say, "We're not interested in the 30-day ceasefire that you, President Trump, proposed. We're not interested in that," then that will arouse the fury of Trump. And that means the war continues, and then the war escalates. Now, I don't think Russia really wants that. I don't think that would be a good idea for them. I think a better idea, and I think this is what's going to happen, I think a better idea would be for them to agree to the 30-day ceasefire and then see how it goes. Take a leaf out of Israel's book. I mean, Israel is very good at this. I mean, when it comes to public relations, Israel is a master of public relations, which is you pretend that you're interested in peace, and then and suggest to the rest of the world that it's your opponents who are against peace. And so when the ceasefire ends, you say, "Well, it wasn't our fault; it was their fault. They didn't go along with the terms of the ceasefire." So we'll see what happens. I mean, that's what I think. Now, the question then arises: could this be the basis for a long-term settlement? I find that very difficult to see how Russia can accept as a long-term settlement where the battle lines now lie, because it would mean Russia not succeeding in incorporating the 4 oblasts within the Russian Federation, which at least is the most achievable of Russia's war objectives. I mean, we got the denazification, demilitarization, and the 4 oblasts. Well, denazification, demilitarization, I think, are the most difficult to achieve. But the driving the Ukrainians out of the 4 oblasts at least was something that was a tangible goal. Then they could at least say, "Well, we accomplished that." If you haven't accomplished that, then basically you're setting the grounds for the continuation of the war, just like Minsk II, which didn't settle anything, just simply set the stage for the continuation of the war. It took 8 years, but it was inevitable after Minsk that there would be another war, because nothing was settled. And the same thing would happen now. Is like if the 4 oblasts are not fully incorporated within the Russian Federation, then nothing is settled. But I don't think anything that drastic is going to take place within the next 30 days. I don't see how Russia is going to be able to drive the Ukrainians out of Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporozhye. They're still occupying about 30% of each of those oblasts. So I think it's going to be quite difficult. Certainly not within the next 30 days. So that's the issue. But the problem is still for Russia that you have to, you have the 3 Russia's had 3 years fighting this war, and therefore, it was always inevitable that there would be an American president, somebody like President Trump, who would declare that, hey, we're willing to work with Russia. We're willing to have good relations with Russia, but we got to end this war. So up until now, Russia was quite fortunate in having administrations in Washington, governments in Europe, Brussels, who simply wanted to continue with the war. And Russia could then turn around and say, well, okay, you want to continue with the war, you want to go on with your objectives, you want to destroy us, you want to drive us into the ground, you want our country to disintegrate, to degrade, and so on. Well, we're just going to continue. And that was they could do that for 3 years, but the corollary of that is that Russia needed to have settled this within those 3 years. Now they have a president who says, I'm willing to work with you, but you've got to end this. And if you don't, then I can be quite nasty. And I think that's where it's going to be quite difficult. But anyway, let's take a look at our locals page and see what the Gagglers, the people who maintain the dogs in the life to which they have become accustomed, because the dogs feel that they're the ones who do all the work. Certainly, they don't think that I do any of the work, and so we'll see what they say. So here we have we've got Psinook. Okay, so Psinook, I think present. Yeah, okay, that's a link to RT, which is going to be difficult because on this computer I don't have VPN. I have it on my phone, but I don't have it. So, okay, thank you, Psinook. And Psinook says, thanks again for all the content. You and Peter do a fantastic job. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And Ivan Grozny says, good evening, my friend George. Good evening. How are you? I'm well. How are you? Today is an interesting day with the Russians likely to be pushed to a ceasefire. Yeah, I agree. What do you think will happen? Also, it looks like the Russians might take Kursk Oblast back. Do you think they will? It's very hard. I mean, I read the stories just as you do, and it seems that they're making some progress in Kursk, and it's quite possible that they will get them back. But again, if Russia agrees to a ceasefire, 30-day ceasefire, then the ceasefire will apply to Kursk, and so that for another 30 days. They would have to put up with the Ukrainians in Kursk. Now, if they're really on the brink of winning in Kursk and the brink of driving out the Ukrainians from Kursk, then that would make accepting the 30-day ceasefire that much easier. If not, then that is that would be a real problem for the Russians. Now, with the Russians, it's always very hard to know exactly how much progress they're really making. So it seems like the land that they're holding, the land that the Ukrainians have been holding in Kursk, keeps diminishing. And maybe it will completely diminish. Maybe they'll be surrounded and destroyed. But it's not a done deal. So I would hesitate predicting if the Russians really are close to driving the Ukrainians out of Kursk, then that would make accepting the 30-day ceasefire that much easier for the Russians, because there's 30-day ceasefire. But But as long as the Ukrainians are in Kursk, in other words, as long as the Ukrainians are occupying Russian territory, then that is it would be definitely a problem. And then and then in terms of the final settlement, then there would have to be some kind of exchange of territory. But I do have to insist that it's not the people who assume the Russians will just say no. You got to, because that's not the Russian style. Absolutely not the Russian style. I mean, they're always very amenable to negotiations. It's never been the Russian style just to say, where you can shove your peace proposal, pal. We're just continuing with the fighting. It's never what the Russians do. They accepted the Minsk agreements, even though the Minsk agreements clearly did not favor Russia. And they accepted the Minsk agreements, moreover, when Russia had the upper hand. Russia had the upper hand at the time. Ukraine wasn't ready for a war with Russia in 2014, 2015. So Russia could have pretty much done anything, yet the Russians accepted the Minsk Accords. They met, Hollande, they met Merkel, and they accepted that. Istanbul, again, the Russians accepted that, even though, again, it wasn't at all favorable to Russia. So it's just, people who say Russia would just say no. That's just not the Russian style. Now, as I say, I don't know whether that this will be the basis for a long-term settlement, because that would be that would be certainly very problematic for the Russians, simply not to to fail to incorporate all of the 4 oblasts within the Russian Federation. But I would be surprised if they flatly rejected the ceasefire proposal. So anyway, Ivan Grozin says, by any momentum they take further into Sumy Oblast. That's all. That may be the case. The problem now is, in terms of momentum, is the ceasefire plan is on the table, and therefore they're going to have to make a decision quite soon as to whether they're going to accept the ceasefire. I mean, it's not something, well, we can just kick the can down the road and just talk in general terms. You can talk about long-term settlement. That may take time, but you heard what Rubio was saying. They were saying, we want this done like yesterday. So you don't really have the luxury now of, well, I think we'll launch some more military offensives, and that's going to take some time. I don't think so. I think Trump is going to want an answer right away, and then and I think if he doesn't get a positive answer, then I think the assistance to the American assistance to Ukraine will escalate. Okay, so anyway, here we are. Stone River. Always good to see you. Thank you so much, Stone River. Stone River says, do you think Trump has a 4-year game plan, ending Ukraine war, thaws relations with Russia, then enlists Russia to reprise North Korean overtures, pivot to Asia, becomes about revisiting the one China policy from the 70s, and diffusing Taiwan Strait tensions? Too much to hope for. I think he probably does have a strategy. The China strategy, I do think, is much more, as Trump sees it. I mean, Trump is not a war president. I really don't think war is what comes naturally to him. I don't think he sits there poring over histories of past wars. I don't think he sits there trying to understand Clausewitz or anything like that. He's not. That's not what interests him. He is interested in business. He's interested in trade. He's interested above all in advancing American interests. Taiwan, he obviously sees as enormously economically advantageous to the United States with the superconductor business. It seems like Taiwan has a monopoly on that. And with China, he basically thinks that he can bring China to its knees by economic means alone. I think he's going to do it through tariffs, and he's going to do it through threatening China to play ball with the American system. In other words, don't even think about creating an alternative economic system. If you want to continue having access to the American market, then you better drop all your ideas about an alternative economic system to the one led by the United States. So I think that is his long-term plan. Clearly, this war with Russia doesn't make any sense to him. He's not interested in that. However, he's also not prepared to surrender everything that that NATO has done over the past 3 years. He's just not going to do it. He's willing to do I think some kind of a compromise, what he deems as a compromise, which is whatever territory Russia has taken during the past 3 years, Russia can keep. They did it. They fought. They lost a lot of lives for it. Let them keep it. Ukraine did its best, but ultimately, we're not going to go to war for Ukraine. We're not going to threaten a nuclear annihilation on behalf of Ukraine. We're just going to have to settle. And Russia, I think without question, he sees Russia as someone who could be a useful partner. But one has to keep in mind, and this is where I don't understand what the Russians are saying, that he doesn't see America and Russia as equals. He doesn't see Russia as in some ways a kind of an equal partner of the United States. He more or less sees Russia as someone who could be quite useful to secure American objectives. So, we talked last week about the Iran issue and how he'd like to settle the Iran issue once and for all, and he would like help from the Russians in doing that. I think he would also like some kind of a, I would say, he doesn't think Russia and China are going to go to war or they hate each other or anything like that. But basically, he wants the Russian-China partnership to be much less close than it is, to enable the Russians to, be a part of the West again. That way, Russia has more flexibility and is not dependent on China, and that makes China easier to take care of. And I think that's part of why he's doing what he's doing in Ukraine. He just basically tried to get Russia more into the Western system, and therefore less dependent on China, and that would help weaken China. I think that's what he's doing. I don't know if that is doable, because I don't know to what extent the Europeans are ready to go along with. The Europeans have become obsessively hostile to Russia. They absolutely hate Russia, and I don't think they're going to go along with any of Trump plans to normalize relations with Russia, to allow Russia to be a part of any kind of global system. They just won't do it. They're too filled with hatred, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. So I don't know that will work. But in terms of when you say about revisiting one China policy. I don't think he's going to do that. I don't think anyone wants to revisit the one China policy. I think it's a done deal. But as long as China doesn't threaten Taiwan, and China doesn't do that, then I think I think Trump will just let that go. What he does want to do is to cut China down to size. I think he absolutely wants China to accept its subordinate position in the global pecking order. And I think that is an important consideration. And I think he wants to do to China what a previous generation of statesmen in the 1980s did to Japan at the time when Japan was threatening to supplant the United States as a kind of the leading economic power in the world. I think the Americans brought Japan down to size, and I think he's going to try to do something similar to China. Getting Russian help on North Korea? Yeah, I think so. I think so. But the problem from Russia's perspective, and again, the Russians are very excited about suddenly these overtures from Washington, is that the same thing is happening to Russia as has happened many times before. It's something that Putin has talked about many times, which is, well, the West comes to us when they want help from us. When they want something from us, they ask us for help. But they never help us when we go to them and ask for help. It's we're only useful to them as long as we can help solve their problems. And I think this is how Trump again envisages. Oh yeah, we'd like your help on North Korea. Yeah, we'd like your help on Iran. Oh yeah, we need some icebreakers in the Arctic. We got to get all those minerals out of the Arctic, so we need some help in developing these icebreakers. But that's these are all things that the Americans want. But what does Russia get out of all this? And I think that it's the same problem that Russia has faced ever since the end of the Cold War, which is, well, the Americans come to the Russians when they want help with something, but they never reciprocate. They never address any of Russia's security concerns. And it's not clear, even from that statement that we read out, it isn't clear that the Americans are prepared to accept Russia's concern, and we know what Russia's concern is. Russia's concern is security. That it's not, it's security concerns. The fact that the West continues expanding up to Russia's borders, that it's building missile bases, military bases on Russia's borders, and has no intention of stopping them. And it's that's something Russians have repeatedly stated, and it's not something that Trump seems particularly interested in addressing. So again, when we look at it that way, then I don't see the possibility of a long-term solution. I don't think, even if I think it's quite possible that Russia will accept a temporary ceasefire, I don't see anything that came out of today's meeting that would in any way address Russia's issues, and therefore I don't see Russia has any need to accept a long-term settlement. Certainly, a long-term settlement on the basis of the current lines of contact, in other words, which would be the ceasefire lines. I don't see it at all. But no doubt Trump thinks that's a good deal. Why, think, hey, that sounds like a good deal to us, but I don't think Russians will see that as a good deal. And NKMRD says, good evening. Thank you, NKMRD. Marx 2023 says, this is about rearming Ukraine. The Russians must reject this false peace. Yeah, I think they should. I don't think it's going to be. I look. The West never comes to these things with clean hands. They never come to these things with any kind of honesty and decency. There's no question. But let's keep in mind, this is Trump's plan. This isn't a NATO plan. This isn't a European plan. This isn't a Ukrainian plan. This is Trump's plan. And as I say, unlike the Ukrainians and the Europeans, Trump really doesn't want this war to continue. He just wants this to end it. So I think in this case, he, I think he is coming to it with in good faith. But Ukraine isn't acting in good faith, and the Europeans aren't acting in good faith. And so there's no question that during this time, this 30-day ceasefire, I am absolutely convinced that Macron, Starmer, Maloney, and the rest of that gang in Europe will try to exploit the 30 days in order to get as much in terms of weaponry into Ukraine as possible for the resumption of the fighting. And they're going to pass on as much intelligence as possible. Whatever intelligence they find, they're going to just give it everything they give it to Ukraine. Like the way I talk about the tips in the tip jar. I say, whatever you've got, whatever money you've got, pick it up, dump it into the tip jar. So whatever intelligence they've got, whatever weaponry they've got, they're going to give it all to Ukraine. I mean, that's it. So this is, I looked at, when I showed you those headlines in the media, the only thing, they're not interested at all. They're not playing up at all the 30-day ceasefire idea. You think they might be quite excited by a 30-day ceasefire. No. They don't want a ceasefire. The only thing that matters to them is the arms spigot has been opened up. Thank God we can send as much as we can to Ukraine because they want to continue with the war. They just want to use this period to continue with the war, and I think the Europeans will do that. And why wouldn't they? They're not a party to this. They're not a party to anything. This would be Russians and Ukrainians carrying out an American proposal. The Europeans are not part of it at all. So the Europeans can absolutely send everything they have into Ukraine, and I think that's exactly what they will do. So, it's a difficult position for Russia to be in. I mean, the one that they don't want to say no to Trump, they want to keep in with Trump. There's obviously some mutual respect between Trump and his people and the Kremlin. But on the other hand, people here, I think, point out what's going to happen during this 30-day. Yeah, I mean, Ukraine will be built up in preparation for resumption of the fighting after 30 days. Meg 21093, hello, good to see you, Meg. Thank you very much. And then Stone River says, Rubio, quoting Rubio, if the Russians say no, then we'll unfortunately know what the impediment is to peace here. Yeah, I heard that. I did hear that. Rubio has been sounding that for some time, saying, well, I don't know whether the Russians are really interested in peace. We'll have to see. We got to find out. We've got to find out whether the Russians are interested. It's always somehow that the Russians who are not really interested and that they're just dissimulating. And that I think is always that the implication. The Russians just pretending that they're interested in peace. And so, yeah, that's it. And so you quote, yeah. If the Russians say no, then we'll unfortunately know what the impediment is to peace here. Yeah, that's exactly what it says. Marx 2023 says it's America that wants the ceasefire, not Ukraine. Trump has no cards and no way to keep Ukraine supplied. Europe is out of supplies. I just don't buy your argument. Well, you're wrong. You're wrong. as they say in New York. Yeah, of course, America has arms. It's the biggest arms exporter in the world. Um, it wouldn't be hard at all to shells are very easy to produce. Drones are easy to produce. Ukraine itself has now become quite a workshop, a drone workshop. Its factories now produce a lot of drones, a lot of artillery. Yeah, absolutely, they can keep this war going. Yeah, if this was the case, that they really had nothing, then the tone would be very different from the West. The West would be suing for peace. The West isn't suing for peace. This is just Trump, who I think wants this to come to an end for reasons that we spelled out. It's just not Trump's. It's not Trump's war. It's not Trump's agenda, and I think he wants to end it. But the notion that somehow there's nothing, the cupboard is bare and they can't fight this war, sorry. I mean, we've been hearing that for 3 years. It's clearly a wrong assessment. And in the meantime, as I say, over the past 3 years, Ukraine has now built up quite a formidable arms production process in its country. I'm not sure how they managed to pull it off, but they are producing drones, at a stunning pace. Look at the drone attack that they launched just last night. That was a massive drone attack hitting Moscow. So they can do this. Artillery shells, again, not hard to produce. So I wouldn't count on that. Nice idea, but I wouldn't count on it. Anyway, March 2023, it was the USA that carried out regime change. It was the USA that started the violence in the Donbass. It was Mr. Peace Trump who armed the regime. It was Trump that heavily sanctioned Russia. No, I agree with that. I agree with that. It's, the Americans are being thoroughly hypocritical here. There's no question. They're somehow pretending to be disinterested observers, peacemakers, as if they hadn't played a massive role in the coup, instigating this war, and really exacerbating this conflict over the years. And I absolutely agree with that, including Trump. And including that Trump may pretend that it was all Biden, but by his own statements, when he says, "Oh, I was the one who sent the javelins to Kiev. I was the one who ensured that Kiev would survive. I was the one who helped destroy the Russian tanks and so on." He says it. Those are his words. And Obama sent blankets, and I sent javelins. So no question. Trump did all of that. Trump was the one who broke the dam and sent the lethal arms. So it's thoroughly disingenuous now for Trump to pretend that he had nothing to do with the war. Of course, he played a huge role. He very much escalated the American involvement. Obama, of course, was the arch villain because it was he who engineered the coup. But what happened afterwards, again, Trump played an enormous role, and then of course Biden played an even bigger role. But Trump's line now is different. But whether that's going to get him very far, whether this is really going to bring the war to an end, I'm fairly skeptical. I think it's going to be quite difficult to bring this war to an end. Where are we? Okay, here we are now. And Mark says, why peace in Ukraine and not in Gaza? Well, that's a very good question. Very, very good question. Yeah, but that, of course, is itself interesting. So here, there's great urgency about peace. in Ukraine. We got to, and we watched how Rubio were talking about dying, and this is terrible. Young men are dying, and Trump talks about that. It's terrible, all this destruction. But that same argument isn't applied in Gaza. There, they seem to be quite keen on resuming the war in Gaza. So, somehow, there's great urgency for peace in Ukraine, but not in the case of Israel and Gaza. And then I think how Trump sees things. Trump sees that he wants to align himself with Israel in the Middle East. I mean, we did a podcast on that the other day, and I think Peter and I were both baffled how Trump's America First vision, how the MAGA vision is compatible with this Israel First policy. It's clearly not at all in America's interest to embrace the cause of Israel. It's actually quite dangerous, particularly if America gets itself in a war with Iran, which could indeed be very dangerous. But in the case of Russia, I think he does want to put Russia to use, Russia to American use. I think American use against China. I think America's use with Iran, America's use in the case of North Korea. But as I say, to America's use, Russia, Trump isn't going to do anything for Russia. Whatever Russia wants, Trump isn't going to deliver. He just wants to use Russia for his own ends. And I think that's a different, he now has a different stance from the stance that he had during his first term. During his first term, I think because of Russiagate, he was quite happy to, he was in two minds about escalating the war in Ukraine, because yes, he sent the javelins. On the other hand, for a while, he held up the military aid to Ukraine, which is what got him impeached. But he was still fighting off the impeachment. He was fighting off Russiagate, and so his priorities were different. But now I think when he seems to have China in his sights, he wants to deal with the China problem. He really doesn't want to have an enemy in Russia. I think that I think is the way he's thinking now. He has a different perspective from the one that he had during his first term. Mark says 30-day ceasefire was set back the Russians months on the battlefield, which would cause more losses on the Russian side. Yeah, that's certainly a consideration. That's one consideration. But on the other hand, they have the other consideration. Do they want to antagonize the Americans, given also the hopeful signs that have come from Washington about improving relations? And that you have to balance all these things. I mean, this for Russia, that is also quite a big thing, having good relations with the leading power in the world. Suddenly all of these crises will be put on the back burner. That's another factor. And if they say no to this 30-day ceasefire, then guaranteed they're going to have really bad relations with the United States. So all the hopeful signs that have been coming in over the past few months, and all the friendly noises, and all the investment that has been made, that somehow with Trump things could be better. Relations with the United States can be put on a new setting, new Yalta and whatever. That's all going to go. That'll be, and then you'll be back in exactly the same place as you did with Biden. And I don't know whether that's really where any Russian leader wants to go. It's just not where the Russians have ever wanted to be, and they've never really wanted to be isolated. And they've never really wanted to have a permanent state terrible relations with the West. So anyway, NKMARD says they would need a ceasefire for elections. Is that right? If that's still on the table, as rumors were, and the U.S. talked with the opposition. Yeah, there were these rumors, and that's a very good point that you're making. That a ceasefire would be the moment to have elections. I don't know whether elections will necessarily change anything very much in Ukraine. I don't know whether Zelensky would be reelected. He probably wouldn't be, but who would be, and whether that would improve anything. It's quite likely that Zaluzhny would be elected. Zaluzhny is a kind of a Banderite, even more so than Zelensky. Zelensky wasn't really a Banderite, but I think Zaluzhny is. Again, Zelensky was kind of a much more of a non-ideological. He had never really been part of this Ukrainian nationalist movement. I think Zaluzhny is, but of course people change, and Zaluzhny, a Banderite like Zaluzhny could turn out to be very pragmatic. We'll have to see, but you're right. I think that that the 30-day ceasefire could absolutely be used as an opportunity for elections in Ukraine, and that would incidentally be another argument for why the Russians might be tempted to accept the 30-day ceasefire, because hey, they've been talking and talking and talking about Zelensky having no legitimacy, but here they'll say, well, this is your opportunity. You say Zelensky has no legitimacy. Well, look, 30-day ceasefire, we can have an election. We'll see who really has legitimacy. So that would be an argument that will be used against the Russians in the negotiations. Hey, you want a democratically elected president? You want a legitimate president to deal with? Well, have the 30-day ceasefire, and then we can hold an election. So I think that's going to be an important argument presented by Trump's people. Marx 2023 says Trump claims he's talking to Putin on a regular basis, yet Peskov said they have only spoken once. Well, Trump has a way of expressing himself in a kind of broad strokes. So when he says we're speaking on a regular basis, he may be referring to all of the negotiations that are taking place among Russians and Americans. And since whatever Russians the Americans are talking to, those Russians are clearly speaking on behalf of Putin. I mean, they are Putin's representatives, just like Waltz and Rubio and whatever American intermediaries are talking to the Russians. They are speaking on behalf of Trump. So, in broad strokes, you can say, well, Trump is talking to Putin. And I think that's kind of, I think, what he meant. He didn't say literally, I'm speaking to him on a one-to-one basis. I'm just saying, well, my people who are speaking on my behalf are talking to Putin's people who are speaking on Putin's behalf. There's always a problem with people who take Trump very literally. It's somebody, I think, maybe I don't know. I think was quoting John Helmer, and John Helmer's video about Trump and Russia and so on. And so in this video, Helmer took issue with Trump's claim about the 350 billion. And he went on and on and on and on and on about how this is untrue. America hasn't spent 350 billion on aid to Ukraine. Now, apart from anything else, the most boring exercise anyone can engage in is trying to fact check Trump. Trump doesn't talk in a way which you can fact check. He's talking about big, broad sweeps. He's always been an exaggerator. Anyone who remembers him from his earliest days, he would always exaggerate. He would exaggerate his own wealth. He would exaggerate his property holdings. That's what he does. He exaggerates. So if you're going to go spend, I don't know how long, trying to say that, oh, it wasn't really 350 billion, it was much less, you're wasting everyone's time. You're not going to persuade anyone about anything if you're going to try to fact check Trump. The other thing is that Trump counts things in different ways. Everyone's counting, oh, how much money was appropriated by Congress. But that's a stupid way of counting. That doesn't in any way encapsulate everything that the United States has done for Ukraine. And I think Trump is right about that. Because Trump is counting all of the assistance that the United States has provided Ukraine. So that means all of the satellite information, all of the targeting information, all of the drones that have been flying, American drones flying and gathering intelligence, which was then passed on to Ukraine. So, and all the training that Americans have provided Ukraine. So he started counting in a different way, saying, well, if you took all of what we have done for Ukraine, that adds up. I don't know whether it adds up to 350 billion. Probably doesn't. But there's nothing more pointless than to only address how much was appropriated by Congress for Ukraine. That's not what Trump is doing. Trump is counting all of the assistance that the United States has provided, and he's right to do it. He's right to count it in the way that, if you're saying, well, how much have we given to Ukraine, then you're going to count everything, not just what Congress has appropriated. I mean, this seems to be a fairly obvious point. And as I was listening to this, I finally just turned it off. I said, I can't take this. I mean, I'm going to listen to somebody fact-checking Trump. I've got nothing else to do with my time. So anyway, DJ 53144, always good to see you. Thank you very much. And woof woof. So that's very good. I mean, it's somebody's thinking about the dogs, because the dogs are convinced that they do all the work. And this business model of they're not getting due reward for all the work, they think it's just not working. Marx 2023 says, on a lighter note, George, were you at Crofts cheering for the Chihuahuas? No, the Chihuahuas are very tough. I have difficulties dealing with them. I'm sure that if they had some other dogs, the gentler dogs, the Labradors, or the I think I'd have an easier time of it. But the Chihuahuas are very difficult to deal with. They're small but fierce, and so they're I don't know yet what's the best way. So I wasn't cheering the Chihuahuas. So I'd be cheering, I think, for the Labs. I think the Labs would give me an easier time. And the Marx 2023 says exactly, George Duterte is on his way to that kangaroo court. No, that's absolutely right. And I just want to make this point that Duterte wasn't given any kind of due process rights. There's an arrest warrant, and then he was just bundled off to The Hague. Now, it's a fundamental right of any defendant to challenge the legality, legitimacy, and appropriateness of an arrest warrant. And therefore, you say this is an arrest warrant, to say no, it has no legal validity. I mean, that's a very basic right of any accused. You go to the courts and say no, and particularly in this case of the Philippines, because Philippines is now no longer um, no longer recognizes the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. It was Duterte who left the criminal court, I think, in 2019. So currently, and for the past 6 years, the Philippines has not recognized the jurisdiction of the ICC. So therefore, this is a very strong basis for any accused to challenge the legal validity of an ICC arrest warrant. Now, the media, in the slimy, scummy way that they do, said, "Oh well, the courts have already ruled on that," and said that, "Oh, at the time that Duterte committed these crimes, the Philippines recognized the jurisdiction of the ICC." It doesn't matter. It doesn't. First of all, it doesn't matter what the ICC says in its arrest warrant. The issue is whether in the Philippines court, whether that argument has any legal validity, given that the Philippines does not recognize the jurisdiction of the ICC. And it just doesn't matter that, at the time, 2016 to 2019, that the ICC is talking about, or at that time it recognized the jurisdiction of the ICC. It doesn't matter. It doesn't recognize it now. And that would be a very strong basis for challenging the legal validity of the arrest warrant. And that every defendant has to have that right. The prosecutors come along with their arrest warrant, and then you go to your lawyer, and the lawyer says, "No, this arrest warrant has no validity. Everything in it is wrong." There's no, and now, in a domestic court, you can say, "Okay, well, it's fine. That you have the lawyers make this case, and then you are released by the court, and on bail or whatever. You're released. But once you're in The Hague, and once they shove you in one of those prisons in The Hague, then you have no basis for challenging the legal validity of it, because once he's there, once he's in the hands of the ICC, he has no way of getting out. So this was basically abduction by the ICC, and it brings to mind the way the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, the ICTY, in 2001 abducted Milosevic. Again, Milosevic also did not have the opportunity to challenge the legal validity of the arrest warrant. And he had also a very strong basis to challenge the arrest warrant, because the Constitutional Court had ruled, the Constitutional Court of Yugoslavia had ruled that he is not to be taken anywhere until it's rendered a decision on the claim of the Serbian government, led by CIA stooge Zoran Djindjic, on his claim that the Serbian government can ignore the will of the federal government and just simply pick up Milosevic and hand him over to the ICTY. That was the claim made by Djindjic, and the Constitutional Court said, "Well, we're going to have to wait on that. This is a decision that we have to make a decision. Obviously, whether the government of a member state of Yugoslavia can overrule the decision of the federal government, that's obviously something that the Constitutional Court needs to decide." But instead of that, instead of waiting for the Constitutional Court to make its ruling, Milosevic was kidnapped on the orders of Djindjic, CIA stooge, bundled into a plane and handed over to The Hague, where he died. So died 5 years later. So there's form here. Um, and you know, this is what the Human Rights Brigade does. The Human Rights Brigade has absolutely no respect for any kind of legal procedures because they're so excited by their nonsensical ideas of, oh, we're going to end impunity, no more impunity for leaders. But of course they have impunity. Of course they have impunity because, as the U.S. Supreme Court ruled, presidents, which is, chief executives of the state, enjoy sovereign immunity. They enjoy immunity for their official acts. So even if he committed crimes against humanity and whatever during his war on drugs, and you'd have to say that's clearly a perfectly noble enterprise in trying to save your people from the scourge of drugs, drug lords, gangsters. I mean, he was obviously acting in his official capacity as president of the country. You're trying to save your country from a scourge. He's clearly acting in his official capacity, and he cannot be prosecuted for it. I mean, that seems fairly obvious. But again, the drivel you get in the media. Oh, we've got to end impunity. We're ending impunity. Well, impunity for some. Duterte was always hated by liberals. He was one of, if you remember back in the days, in his heyday, it seems like a long time ago, but the media absolutely hated him because he referred to Obama as the son of a whore. Don't know why he did that, but he did refer to Obama as the son of a whore. And so that antagonized the American Democrats. And then he made nice with China. He went out of his way to cultivate good relations with China. That antagonized Trump and his people. So he had no real friends in the United States, I think, which again has contributed to the fact the ICC felt that they could just go after him without any repercussions, unlike when they went after Netanyahu, and then the full wrath of the United States came down on them. And then we have, where are we? Yes. So then we have Robert, who says the war on drug acts to incite the formation of dangerous gangs in the midst of working class. These gangs pose a threat to the working class, forcing them to accept draconian state security and justice they otherwise would not. At the same time, when a political potentate like Duterte goes after these gangs, the West can then trot out human rights abuse allegations as a pretext to arrest him. The solution is to end the drug war, just as the end of prohibition was to end gangland war. Well, the problem with that is that the drugs are really a real scourge, much more of a scourge than alcohol. Particularly countries in Asia, which really were devastated by drugs, and this is happening in the United States as well. Millions of people have been completely destroyed by drugs. So I see very little benefit in just simply, well, let's legalize it. I mean, one of the reasons, one of the problems with legalizing drugs, I mean, hey, well, let's just do it. Let's legalize it. Hey, no one thought of this before. Is, of course, that it will have a devastating effect on society. There's no question about that. It will do that. But then somebody has to pay the cost. And this was the argument that, of course, was used in the case of tobacco, and quite effectively, that, well, okay, the tobacco industry makes a lot of money on selling cigarettes, but everybody else has to pay for the costs of cigarettes because of the huge damage they do to public health. So therefore, who's paying for it? You know, say, well, who's going to pay for this? Well, certainly not, the people who have suffered, well, they'll pay some of the costs, but everybody else does. Everybody else has got to pay because everyone else will have to pay more through higher insurance premiums, even though you don't smoke, but nevertheless, you're going to have to pay through higher health insurance premiums. But above all, governments will have to meet the cost. They're going to have to do it through Medicaid, and not just through Medicaid. They have to, when hospitals come along and say, "Hey, we don't have the money. We can't pay for all of this treatment. Otherwise, we'll just go bankrupt and and have to close down." Governments have to step in and bail them out. And this is what governments do. They bail out hospitals when they essentially cannot meet the bills. So this was an effective argument against the tobacco companies that you are inflicting the costs on everyone else. And I think drugs are a much greater health hazard than cigarettes, and a much greater health hazard than alcohol is. Because I think alcohol, more or less, is it's quite good for you as long as you do it in moderation. I mean, it is of course a problem, and there is no question. Alcohol is a problem if you do it in excess, and yeah, you again also do inflict the costs on everyone else. So I don't see the great advantages that society gains by legalizing narcotics. And the fact is that Duterte and China and Turkey and many countries take a very hard line on drugs, much more so than the Europeans, because these countries have suffered the effects of drugs, and they just don't want to go through that again. And again, when you suffer the effects, when so many people lose their lives and lose their health, lose their families, and it leads to crime and dependency and so on, somebody always has to pay. Somebody's going to have to pick up the check, because no one is going to just allow people to die in the streets. So therefore, if you're going to look after them, you provide medical care and so on, that means somebody has to pay for it. So I don't, I tend to sympathize with leaders who really don't want their societies devastated by drugs. And here again, it's like people who are on these chats, they're always Russia, they support Russia this, Russia that, Well, Russia has taken a very hard line on drugs, and again, Russia has experienced devastating scourge from drugs. I mean, really, in recent years, terrible, pain that has been inflicted on Russian society as a result of drugs. So, those who kind of champion the cause of Russia or even China somehow never really address that issue. Well, hey, you want someone who's really serious about the drug war, then take a look at Russia and China. Anyway, Robert, thank you so much for your observation. NKMRD says NATO plans building a kerosene pipeline somewhere, Germany, Czech, Poland. Yeah, well, that's probably, as I think, NATO is determined to keep this war going. The one problem they have there is that NATO is the United States, so everything depends on which way Trump's going to go, and I think the jury is still out on which way Trump is going to go. I mean, as I say, what will count, what will matter most is how Russia deals with this 30-day ceasefire proposal, which is Trump's own proposal, and I think that's going to be the key to deciding how Trump is going to deal with Russia. Meg, 21093, hello Meg. Russia should do something novel, like trying to win the war. I couldn't have put it better myself. Hey, I try to win the war. Yeah, that would that that might help. SMO, how ridiculous is this? Declare war and win. I agree. I agree for you. And I've been saying this. Um, Russia's had 3 years, and in a way, the problem that Russia has now found itself in is they're dealing with an American president who's willing to be very friendly and very helpful, but in return, he says you've got to bring it to an end. I mean, you've got to, and by bringing to an end, no, you're not going to keep fighting the SMO for another 2-3 years. You got to end it now, ceasefire now. That was always a problem. It was, they had all the time in the world to watch Trump campaigning and Trump winning and so on. They said the moment Trump becomes president, he is going to lean on us, demanding that we bring this war to an end. And then so it was 3 years wasted. Just simply, I think now saying to Trump, "Oh, well, we'll continue doing this for another 3 years," that's not gonna cut it. So, but you're right. You have to win a war. That's no question. I mean, it's always, if you don't win a war, then it becomes very problematic. In all sorts of ways, you're just going to create serious problems for yourself if you don't win. You got to win. You got to go in. And I said this at the very beginning of this SMO, that Russia really needs to wrap this up quickly, because the longer it goes on, not just the loss of life, but when other countries start making calculations about the relative strengths of other powers, relative strength of Russia, and then all sorts of things can go wrong. Incidentally, we warned about the possibility of a nuclear war and so on. That's still on the table. There's, we're not out of the woods yet, just because there's been this détente of sorts between America and Russia. We're not out of the woods. So that was always an imperative. You've got to get that war done quickly. Otherwise, it's not good. So anyway, Stone River, thank you, Meg. Stone River says, what lies behind the UK and Europe's obsessive hate for Russia, hate that runs entirely against its economic and geopolitical interests? Being prosperous and avoiding war, particularly a nuclear one, would be nice. Well, yeah, thank you, Stone River, for your generosity. And it's a very good question, and I don't know that there's really a very satisfactory answer to that. It's something that's come about relatively recently. I mean, if it was more the Americans who were driving the Russophobia, particularly with Obama and the Democrats, Soros, there was very much, that was that they were the one driving originally this Russophobia, but France and Germany had maintained relatively balanced positions, and this sudden reversal whereby it's the Americans who are sounding reasonable and the Europeans who are off their rocker. It's a very interesting juxtaposition. Part of it, I think, is the influence of the new East European states that have been inducted very rapidly and very ill-advisedly into Europe. All the Baltic states, Poland, Czech Republic, Romania, Poland, they have influenced things. I mean, they all came in. They all introduced their obsessive hatred of Russia into Europe. Um, and then you have the rise of these strange pseudo lefties like Annalena Baerbock. And on top of that, you have the pathological British, who doubtless think that if we maintain this hostility to Russia, that elevates Britain in the world, because then Britain becomes the leader of this anti-Russia bloc. I think that all that that helps. The ideological argument which people present, that, oh well, Russia is a conservative country. I mean, this is the argument of Dugin. Well, Russia represents family and conservatism, and that's why the West doesn't like them. I'm not buying that argument. I don't think Russia today is particularly conservative. Yes, Putin often sounds conservative, but as do other European leaders, as does Maloney. And yet Maloney is also very anti-Russian. So and to be honest, Russia really isn't that conservative. You watch Russian television. I mean, does it really exude a kind of Reithian conservatism of like the BBC of the 1940s, 50s, and 60s? And that's why Reithian, like Lord Reith, who was the first chairman of the BBC, who was believed that the BBC should have this role of elevating the public, morally, educationally, intellectually. That's the role of broadcasting. I don't see any of that in Russia. And other people can point out that when we come to all these issues like COVID, the bio identity and everything else, Russia doesn't seem particularly conservative. It's not exactly championing individual freedom against the globalists. So Dugin's argument would be nice. It would be interesting, but I don't think that the hatred for Russia really is about Russia's supposed conservatism as opposed to Western liberalism. And then, but anyway, thank you so much, Stone River. And then Marx says, George, it seems to me the American negotiations are take what we offer or else. Yeah, no, I agree with you there as well. I think that is the offer, and I think that's why, as I said, Russia now is in a very difficult situation. They've elevated Trump. They keep talking about how great Trump is and how they're going to have friendly relations with Trump. Got a new productive relationship. New Yalta 2.0 and so on. But having elevated Trump and having sung his praises and extolled his pragmatic, realistic worldview, it's going to be difficult to turn around and say, well, where you can shove your peace plan. You can't just turn around and say that he's such a great guy, and then say, well, but I'm not interested in what? In peace. And again, Russia said, well, we are interested in peace, and Trump saying that, well, here's my peace proposal, a 30-day ceasefire. Look, there are very good arguments for rejecting the ceasefire. I mean, I think people have pointed out. I think that they'll be exploited, abused. It's a way of weakening Russia, strengthening Ukraine. The Europeans are not going to accept this. They're going to use the 30 days in order to strengthen Ukraine. I think they are all very good arguments, and I think that's probably what would happen during a 30-day ceasefire. But on the other side is is it a good idea to antagonize Trump? And then so we'll have to see. We'll have to see which way the Russians are going to turn. The decision was going to have to be made really in the next few days, because clearly the Americans are really making a big push, and we knew Trump would make a big push. So I think this shuttle diplomacy is going to be taking place really, may well be taking place now. So the Russians are going to have to make a decision very quickly which way they want to go. But I agree, it's a take it or leave it proposition, and it's unfortunate Russia is in this position because 3 years on and this war still hasn't been concluded. Anyway, NKMARD said we have a long culture of alcohol in Germany. That's true. Lots of problems, sure, but overall, everyone has knowledge about alcohol. People are not irritated or afraid by it so much, and society can help society better in that regard. There is a culture and knowledge about alcohol, and the shelves don't get emptied every day just because it's legal. I think so. I think you're right. I mean, people, by and large, behave rationally and reasonably with alcohol, by and large. But of course, people don't. People do drink to excess, and alcohol does destroy families. People also behave stupidly with alcohol. They're prone to violence. They're prone to driving under the influence and killing people as a result. So definitely there are many negatives to alcohol, even if that's outweighed by the positives, and that most people drink in moderation and don't get behind the steering wheel of a car when they've had a few. That took some time to acquire. The problem is that I think drugs are more dangerous. I think they're more addictive. I think their effects are much more deadly. I mean, we've seen what fentanyl has done. We've seen what heroin has done, and maybe it's possible that down the road, 50 years time, people will acquire the similar kind of ability to deal with heroin and cocaine and the rest, or methamphetamine and fentanyl and everything else, as reasonably as they deal with alcohol. Maybe, but that's a long time, and then you could pay a huge price in the meantime. But you also have to say why. Why do we need this? We already have lots of bad things out there. We already have alcohol, which has some negative effects. We already have cigarettes, obviously have negative effects. Why would we want to dump all this on our society? Inflict all this, all these health problems on our people, and then inflict huge cost on addressing this problem. All the costs of healthcare and so on. Why do we need this when we already have a number of other social problems? And you've got to think about the social problems. That life expectancy is declining in many Western countries. Life expectancy, not among the rich people. Among the rich people, the people who are smart about how they live their lives, they're living into their 90s, which they didn't used to. Now people are living into their 90s, into their 100s. It's not unusual now when you look at the obituary pages that somebody died, he was 99, he's 103, and whatever. It used to be very, very unusual, but now it is. But who isn't? Who's dragging down the life expectancy? Well, most ordinary people, the very people who are not protected from these scourges, these health scourges such as drugs. So you start introducing that. You introduce all the fentanyl and methamphetamines and all the heroines and everything else. They're the ones who are going to do it. They're the ones who are going to suffer. Ordinary people are going to suffer. It's not going to be the rich. People who are smart about how to live their lives, people who are smart about what health hazards to avoid, how to live a long, healthy, productive life. They don't touch the stuff. They don't touch drugs because they know it's not going to end well. Anyway, on that very gloomy note, so I think I'll bring this to an end. Thank you, everybody who is culling the herd. Yeah, I think it's about, P. Durpan says culling the herd. Absolutely right. Anyway, thank you, everybody who joined me today. Thank you for all of your really interesting and fascinating observations and comments. You disagreed with me. Fine, we'll see what happens. We'll see who's right. But anyway, and above all, thank you everyone who had joined me. NKMRD just said, outside of a DDR-like systems with multi-layers, fences, mines, and auto turrets and soldiers, drugs will always come in. So the sole focus of blocking getting them in and therapy did not really work. We'll have to keep dealing with that. Good talk. Keep it up. I mean, drugs will get in, but you can also try to minimize it. You can try, you try to minimize it, and you have to protect. You do have to protect people. I mean, it's just, hey, society, hey, it's a free for all, and just let everybody do whatever they want to do. It's not good. You have to protect. As I say, those smart people, the ones who in the obituary pages, he died, he was 102 years old. Somebody protected them. They knew perfectly well what they shouldn't do, but not everybody does that, unfortunately. And people make a lot of wrong choices. They destroy their lives, and they destroy the lives of the people around them. They destroy families. So one person getting hooked on methamphetamine, well, okay, his life is at an end. But if he has children, then their lives are going to be destroyed as a result. So anyway, that's all of that is. We'll discuss this on another day. Thank everybody who contributed, to the tip jar, because it's only a few hours from now when the dog's awake. First thing they're going to do is check the tip jar. Always the first thing, and then the next thing is turn their rage against me. So anyway, that's my lot in life. Thank you so much. We will be back on Thursday, and I guess we'll know a little more about the Trump ceasefire plan. So thank you for today, and see you on Thursday. All the best. Good night. Bye-bye.